Welcome to the Blackwater Podcast. Today your hosts Sage and Julius talk to John Hazim. John uses shamanic and somatic therapy techniques, runs a local men's group, offers coaching, and facilitates retreats. We hope you enjoy the show, and if you don't, we would love to hear about it. Yeah.
Sage asked if I wanted to do a podcast, and I said, yeah, let's do it.
Cool.
We had our initial conversation. We hadn't really prepared anything. It was kind of just a conversation about how we know each other, and also how we know each other is kind of it's a strange way of knowing someone. I, of course, met Aiden at your men's circle, and then I met Sage through Aiden, and now I basically have days of living with Sage in the woods.
Nice.
And that's kind of my relationship with Sage. He's a guy I hang out in the woods with.
Yeah.
In our conversation, we naturally started talking about men's work as we were kind of talking about ceremony and that space. I want to say it was Sage was talking about how maybe we should do more research into this. And I said, well, why don't we just grab John? He literally does this. You've trained to do these men's circles, to do men's work. So we figured we'd pull you into the mix.
Cool. It's an honor to be here. Yeah, I'd love to share about this topic. I love you guys. I'm excited to just even check in and hang out with you guys. But yeah, I'm excited to dive in.
I'm glad you said that because my conversation with Sage, it did feel like that. It felt very natural because it felt like we were just holding space for each other and exploring some stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's just a wonderful aspect about circle and council, is us being able to come together in a way that we can express ourselves and also feel as though we're being heard.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and that in relation to men's circle is incredibly important because I feel as men, trust is a heavy part of our kind of psyche. We really value trust. Being able to trust someone else is, I find, is very valuable for the men in my circle, and of course the other people in relationships that I share. Trust is incredibly important for me.
Absolutely.
So, because I trust you guys, it makes this kind of exchange so wonderful, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to piggyback off of that because I think you're absolutely right. I think trust is crucial. And I think as it relates to this work and maybe, the discussion we're going to have, it's like without trusting someone, you can't feel safe enough to expose yourself. And so then if we're talking about men's work, if we're talking about really any kind of relationship, if you don't have that, there's no really getting to know that person. And so, yeah, I'm happy that we have some trust established already.
Yeah.
And our pre-conversation kind of talked about that too. I was talking about how I feel like I have a community around me that I do trust and I know can kind of hold me a little bit. Yeah. At least for me, it feels important, and this might be out of fear, but it's important for me to have a wide group of people that I can trust and that can help share space for me, so I don't destroy any one person.
Yeah, I like that, and I'll just echo off of that. I don't know if I have such a wide-ranging group of people that I feel I can trust so deeply, but I do appreciate having a number of people that I feel I can trust because each person gives me such a different perspective. And when I bounce things off of each, and they inspire different things out of me. And so I think we're meant to live in communities where it isn't just people echoing what we already believe, but people have, they're challenging us. They have different ideas. And I think the more people that we have in our life that we trust, that also have very different perspectives of the world, just the fuller and more whole we can be and have more information to inform our decisions and how we move in the world.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. We wanted John to be here because, one, because we like John, but two, because not just because we like him or we're in a relationship with him, but because he does have particular training and he does have a lot of knowledge that in areas that we're very passionate about and we want to know more about. So, John, do you want to kind of give an intro for yourself?
Sure. Yeah, to keep it concise, I have a background in facilitating plant medicine experiences, as you guys know. I lived in Peru for a little bit of time, in Costa Rica, facilitating ayahuasca ceremonies. Coming back home and becoming a father and just kind of shifting from living in the jungle to, just living back in society. Men's work kind of just emerged as a field that really for a long time I was completely unaware of. And quickly I just started to understand that it was work that was really deeply relevant for my personal journey. And the more I dove into it and the more spaces that I was a part of that were kind of around men, working with men for self-development and healing, I was like, oh, this is part of my work for this chapter. So for the last 3 years, for the better part of the last 3 years, I've been holding a regular men's circle here locally, leading different workshops and retreats and experiences and things like that. And so, deeply passionate about self-development, health and well-being, especially as it relates to working with men and plant medicines, certainly. And so, I'm excited to dive in and share a little bit more maybe as we go.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I like it. Thank you, John.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you again, John, for coming aboard and kind of engaging in this cool practice. This has been pretty fresh, but the idea feels ripe, and I think that we're kind of finding a theme in at least how we're steering these conversations, or steering our general conversation with this podcast. So it's an honor to have you come in and speak with us and share your voice and your truth.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for the invitation. I'll just say briefly that I've been somewhat dabbling in human design lately, and I am a projector. And so one of the things regarding projectors is it's said to be valuable for us to wait for the invitation. And I've noticed over the last few months that as I've kind of sat back and allowed people to invite me into spaces as opposed to trying to just kind of inject myself into things, so much more abundance and opportunities and things that I prefer are flowing into my field with relatively little effort. Mm-hmm. And so I say all that to just share a little bit about human design, but also to thank you deeply for the invitation.
You're very welcome. Maybe we could start with talking about what men's work is, and maybe before or after that talking about then why men's work. Why should we even, what is it, and why the heck should we be engaging in it?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I think broadly speaking, without getting too verbose, it's a field of self-development that regards working with the masculine or working with male-bodied individuals. This started or was revived in a lot of ways in the 70s during the mythopoetic men's movement with Robert Bly and people like this, kind of reawakening, initiatory rites of passages and men-only experiences. And it's had its ups and downs, but I think we're really seeing a reemergence of this kind of work, with organizations like Sacred Sons and the Mankind Project. I think that there's something deeply nourishing and deeply sort of primal wherever you come from and wherever your ancestors, emerged from, of working, just men working with men. To just kind of keep it simple without going into non-binary and other orientations and things. But for the most part, when men are together with men, we feel a little bit more at ease. There's not, generally speaking, the sexual competitive kind of nature that can kind of emerge when there are females present. And especially when we're doing this kind of work with a particular intention, whether we're going on a retreat or doing a workshop, but we're getting together as men to sort of, work on our stuff, and also to get kind of really clear. I'll try not to go too far off on a tangent, but I think there's something about the masculine that it offers community and offers society that's very specific, and it doesn't necessarily have to just do with people who are in male bodies, but people who embody a masculine kind of energy. For example, they bring a grounded presence to the spaces that they're in. They bring a sense of safety. Typically, they're often very effective at leading and sort of navigating spaces, and whereas the feminine maybe is more about expression and just kind of like the full array of feelings, emotions, and dancing and art. So I think when we get together as men, we can practice and exercise these things and really get clear on what our own particular flavor of like masculine embodiment is. Because there isn't, in my opinion, and I've heard this from others, is like there aren't a lot of really great, potent examples in the world as maybe there was at one time. So again, I think men's work, to kind of bring it back around, very simply, is just men working with men for their own betterment, self-development, spiritual growth, we might say. And I think it's also for the cultivation of our own unique flavors of masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
I was feeling those words and trying to digest them to the best of my ability in this present moment. Because all of that really is so relevant to how I feel about men's work.
Mm-hmm. And I also, too, I have a immediate resistance against even talking about, like, when you said men in leadership, have more leadership. I was like, ah.
Yeah. Sure. Say more about that.
Me and Sage were talking about, we're products of feminism. Like, I recognize that there's biological differences between men and women, but I feel like there's such a fraught history of saying that women are like less than, or like not the leaders, or not senses of safety, that I almost feel like it's like, I guess right now I feel compelled to like put caveats on stuff, but at the same time, I'm not sure if that's the way that this conversation is going. Maybe we can have a conversation on gender identity in the future.
Sure.
But I think that doesn't. But for me, I do vibe with what you're saying, and I do feel when I get with a group of men that there is some kind of different flavor to that, and it does feel like its own unique thing. And go ahead.
I would just to share off of that, because I resonate deeply with that. And speaking personally, I was raised by my mom and my grandmother and my sister, and my grandpa was around, but like he wasn't as present emotionally or otherwise. And my dad wasn't in my life. And so I have always felt myself to be, generally speaking, a very feminine being, very sensitive. I always got along better with girls growing up than boys. I wasn't like good at sports and things like this. One of the things, because I think you're exactly right. I mean, whether we're talking about patriarchy and just like all the things that have been done to like kind of squash women down and make them property and make them sex objects and give them no rights, I think it makes perfect sense that now they're finally blossoming and they're taking roles as CEOs and they're getting equal pay and they're like really powerful. And yet in the world of men's work and in the conversations that revolve around men's work, and also just around like intimacy and relating, there's a phenomenon that's happening where women are super in their masculine and they're super effective and they're making money and they're like doing all these things, but then they're struggling in relationships and intimacy because it's almost like they're out masculining their who they want to be masculine partners, but then their partners are sensitive feminine guys who feel kind of like put into their feminine because their women are just these fucking powerhouses. And that is an issue that I hear from a lot of folks, and I've felt that myself. Coupled with that, I'll just share one other thing that I've heard from men and I've experienced myself is, I know, speaking for myself, and it seems like it's echoed by a lot of men in our generation, it's like either men literally weren't physically present in their families' lives or they weren't emotionally present. Whatever the case was, it's like a lot of boys of our generation grew up not having strong, clear, masculine role models who were like really like infusing their energy into their boys and children.
We have no idea what healthy masculine energy looks
like. We don't.
Yeah.
And you'll notice that a lot of the men of our generation, especially in the sort of shadow of all this like powerful feminism and all these like things that are going on with women just stepping into their power, is that there's so many men who are like, I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know my direction. I don't have like a sense of like really owning my sexuality and just like really harnessing my individual masculine power, like they don't even have a sense of feeling connected to that.
It almost feels like at times, just to
Yeah.
kind of piggyback on that, just it also feels at times that there's a lot of like walking on eggshells most days, because it feels like those that have been kind of the model for kind of modern men at this point have been very destructive to the image of what being a man is,
or
what it has been
you
at
hope
least
it would be.
represented.
Yeah.
So I think for a lot of men, it's been really difficult to really even know how to even further define what a man really is, because so many models have been skewed from various trauma and other incidences from the past. So it's like our previous models have created this image that like we don't even necessarily want to explore as part of our exploration into the masculine, because it's been so destructive in the past.
Yeah,
absolutely. I'll just share, maybe this is a good caveat early on in our conversation, because polarity is a word that's gotten very popular lately. David Data, who was like very prominent in, like the 90s, he wrote The Way of the Superior Man and a bunch of other texts that were really big for polarity and like masculine, feminine dynamics.
I don't think I've heard of polarity.
So polarity being the idea that
poles,
right, and that in relationship, as it's most relevant and where I hear it most related to, whether it's two men, two women, whatever the situation, there's typically going to be in any relationship that has any amount of kind of like sexual kind of spark or energy to it, there's going to be someone embodying the masculine, there's going to be somebody embodying the feminine, there's going to be somebody sort of receiving, there's going to be somebody giving, there's going to be somebody who's kind of like still, and there's going to be somebody who's kind of like all expressing. And that our awareness of these things is what allows us to then utilize them effectively so that we can relate well, so that we can be effective in our lives. But for so long, we've been completely unconscious to these even being dynamics. So what I'm saying is, I'm pointing this out to do some education, but to also share that my belief is not like this is the end all be all and this is like the definition of how we relate. This is just something that we've been lacking. And generally, as we master these skills of polarity and learning how to embody our masculine and our feminine, which we all have, whatever we relate like and think of ourselves as, we get to a point where then that construct doesn't serve us anymore, and we can be and do and feel whatever the fuck we want, and masculine and feminine doesn't even touch the fucking parameters of it.
So you're saying it's like training wheels almost for a relationship?
In a way, in a way. I just say that because I know lately it's like people are like, oh, everybody talking about polarity and masculine and feminine, they're so like fucking low level. And it's like, no, this is just relevant for folks who didn't grow up with healthy relationships. And so now we're learning how polarity and masculine and feminine works so that we can have good intimacy, so that we can have good family structure. And then eventually, yes, you don't need to think about it so rigidly.
Sage, did you want to jump into something?
It sounds like just building. We're at the point of building our foundations again, because our structures have literally been torn down to the foundation, and we're even just trying to figure out what that foundation is as a model to move forward. It seems.
Yeah. So when you were talking about how women have moved towards empowerment, the pay gap is narrowing. And more women go to college now than guys. Not that college is a good thing to go to. We can talk more later. Yeah, so you have this maybe compared to 50 years ago, you have these very empowered women who are making a lot of money. They're powerful, confident. And you have these men who, like you're saying, a lot of men, because maybe they didn't have good father figures around or whatever, are more feminized. And so you have this relationship that is, it's a reversal of traditional roles, it sounds like you're saying. What it makes me think about is it makes me think about my own life and my own desire for dominance sometimes.
Ooh, yeah.
And I do recognize that...
To be the dominator?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I like to be in charge.
Yeah.
A lot of times.
Mhm.
I can take orders too, though.
Mhm.
Yes, ma'am. But I do think it's dangerous. It's dangerous because we have this classical model where the man was in charge, whatever he said goes. That's not always how it works, because I feel like you'll probably look at some Middle Eastern text from 500 and it'd be like, yeah, the woman runs the household or something. There's clearly humans desire power, whether they're a woman or a female or a woman or a man, and they're going to find ways to get it. It might be more subtle, but I'm just kind of feeling into that idea that there's when two people get in a relationship, in order for that relationship to exist, there is these stated or unstated roles that they're in, and you're talking about the female being the more dominant one. And if people don't agree on the role that they are in, then there's going to be tension. Or if I'm in a role, if I'm being forced to be more submissive or subservient, or I'm trying to think of a more neutral word, then they're not going to be happy. Anyway, that's kind of just, I think there is definitely something to that. If you don't get what you want, and if your expectations don't line up with reality, bad things happen.
Right. Well, yeah, well said. And I appreciate you sharing that. And again, I think you're right. I don't think, it's like this is meant to be like a structure to offer us a perspective that can be potentially helpful to us. And at the point that it's not, then we don't use it. But for example, I have a client that I'm working with currently, like a coaching client, in many ways, a very powerful, intelligent, capable man. His wife, she's a powerhouse. She's a CEO, very driven. What they are struggling with at this time is the intimacy is sort of non-existent. And he's a stay-at-home dad. And even though in a lot of ways he might look on the surface like a guy that a lot of women would want to be with, and you wouldn't know it unless you knew about his life, he's struggling because he's kind of like the stay-at-home dad, and he's kind of in this feminine role, and he's not bringing in money. And all these little components of the story are adding up to a place where he doesn't even feel, he feels a lack of confidence because he's not contributing. She wants him to contribute more. She wants to be ravished. She wants to feel like the sexual, but it's not there because this little dynamic has grown to a point where now the intimacy is flat. The polarity is gone. And so again, it's not to say that now she needs to fucking reverse it and not work and stay at home with the kids, but they need to kind of start to be aware of the dynamic and what's going on. And maybe she can practice softening. She can spend time with her feminine friends. She can shake her ass and just get into her juicy femininity. And he needs to, with some support and being with men, learn how to kind of stand on his own and find a way to bring in some money and just come into his sort of masculine wholeness. And as they do that, I imagine that the intimacy will come back because they've been married a while. They love each other. It's just they've allowed a culture in their relationship to evolve to a point where now there's the resentment that has been unresolved for so long. So again, it's just something that we use, and it's not the end all be all, but it's helpful for a lot of folks is what I found.
Yeah. I really like that idea of here's the structure that we've created, and it's designed to do this because of this historical context. And if it doesn't serve you anymore, get rid of it.
Yeah, sure.
It's so pragmatic.
Yeah. It's true that a lot of folks, when it comes to polarity, when it comes to a lot of different strategies and therapies and modalities, people get very dogmatic about oh yeah, it's got to be like this and it's got to look like this, and a healthy relationship always looks like this. And it's I don't find that kind of rigidity to be helpful.
Yeah, and also too, I really like the idea that roles don't have to be super rigid. That being said, I feel like when they're not, more communication is required. And I'm not that great at communication in relationships, so sometimes it's nice to fall back on established stereotypes and stuff like that.
Yeah. I think that brings my mind to the trust that we were talking about earlier, right? Because I think if you don't have that, then it's kind of hard to give each other the leeway to explore very different sort of ways of embodying ourselves, because we want you, I know you to be this way, so kind of can you stay like that, because that makes me more comfortable. And there takes a bit of trust to allow ourselves to be maybe a guy who wants to be ravished, or like these other ways of relating that are not as popular or encouraged by the culture, for example.
Sage, unless you have something, I have a question.
Well, it seems that my mind's just kind of taking around these ideas of kind of traditional themes, and also kind of being more fluid and transient in the way that we address these roles and themes in our relationships. I think really for me is like, when I think of doing like men's work, I'm really focused on the internal journey. Not so much of how I'm interacting with like people in other circumstances, or even with my own partner, but who I feel as a person and as a man. So I guess I'm just kind of curious about maybe some of the kinds of work we can do as men to kind of become more in tune with how we feel and what we feel aligned towards, I guess.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, let's shift a little bit to kind of like help open up this dialogue in that direction. And I appreciate that invitation, Sage. There's a really good book. I think it's called like In Saturn's Shadow. It's he's a Jungian analyst. He's a fairly famous Jungian analyst. I forget his name at the moment. In the book, and he's been a therapist for many, many years, worked with many, many men. And this book in particular is about like the struggles that are specific to men. One of the things that he highlights towards the end of the book is that with all the patients that he had worked with, the greatest fear that seemed to be the most common amongst the men that he had worked with wasn't the fear of death. It wasn't the fear of, losing everything, dying, just being obliterated, not knowing what, is on the other side, like maybe many of us might assume. He said the thing that was most frightening was the idea of reaching that point of death and recognizing I had not lived my purpose. And so I think we can all, as men, I think everybody, there's a masculine part of us that like deeply yearns to really come into a full contact with like, what am I here in this fairly fleeting lifetime to do? Like, I'm here to do something. And yet for many of us, it takes us, sometimes people go their whole life and they never find that really. And some people struggle and
I would guess most people die not having chased whatever the heck they actually want. I would agree. I don't think they would even know. I think most people die not knowing what they want.
I would agree. And yet,
if I died now, I'd be on that boat.
Exactly. And yet, again, I think one of like the masculine, like one of the things that a father, this is something that I'm learning as a father, and something that I'm learning, I didn't have my father around, and I recently reconnected with him in a beautiful way. But one of the things that a father offers his son is that he is especially positioned, and all his kids, but sons especially, to take notice of their sons and their children and what they're interested in, and help to guide them into like flourishing towards what they actually want, not what we think that would be great for them. And there's something about like, and maybe this is cultural, maybe this is like some ancestral thing, maybe at some point this won't even be relevant. But for now, there feels to be like this kind of ancestral thing, and maybe is partly due to why so many people feel kind of confused and lost, because we haven't had these really strong, powerful, wholesome male figures that have like inspired us to like really discover this for ourselves. But I think, again, when it comes to men's work, and when it comes to like thinking about why is this relevant? Why is this valuable? Why does it matter that men get together with men to do this kind of work? I think one of the powerful things, and maybe one of the most relevant things to like the issues of our time, is like us as individuals and as a collective really getting in touch with like our true calling in this life. Not only just discovering what that is, but then maybe the harder, more important work of like, how do I embody that? How do I get the habits? How do I do the practices? How do I make the connections to not only discover what I'm here to do, but then actualize it in the world? Mm-hmm. And I think that there's something about the masculine that is specifically sort of just well suited to embody that and help others to embody.
There's a certain quality to masculine energy of being able to channel this energy, to channel it in towards constructive means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Whereas, and just to kind of like, since we're going to like play with polarity, and hopefully this is kind of informative and educational to whoever listens to it, where the masculine maybe can offer, that kind of benefit or skill set or essence. The feminine is where maybe we get more of the resources around feeling safe, feeling in our bodies, feeling connected to like the flow of life, learning how to express, learning how to create, learning how to be like in community, be in relationship, like kind of everything else, right? It's like, and that's something that's joked about sometimes when we're talking about like masculine, feminine polarities. It's like really the masculine, and a lot of it is just like sort of presence, stillness, and like purpose. And like the feminine is kind of like everything else. It's like, it's like what makes it worth it, like community and love and relationship and expression and dance and music and all these other things. It's kind of like everything else. And so just to kind of like, flesh that out a little bit.
Yeah, this is one of those conversations that has me like really wanting to go deep in.
I did want to check in with the idea of people not knowing their purpose. And you were talking about how potentially a father figure might be the person who is in tune with their child and can pick up on potentially their interests and talents and where those might mix.
Yeah.
And I love that idea. I would hope we would have many people around us, but when I think about my own life, I can't really identify a person who's done that for me.
Yeah, me either.
There's a concept in homeschooling. It's a type of homeschooling. I'm pretty sure it's called unschooling. And it's this idea that basically you just let the kids, whatever they're into, that's what they do.
Okay.
And of course it could horribly backfire. And it's like, well, I'm into playing video games.
Yeah.
And burning things. But it's this idea that the school system is not set up to do this thing where you find out what people's unique talents are and what their dreams are and how those things might intersect with each other.
Yeah.
In fact, it probably does the exact opposite. Here's a standardized thing, follow these rules. It's there's lots of things that are not allowing us to do that, but I would say the education system is certainly not helping.
Yeah, I would agree 100%.
So here we are, after the fallout of everything that's happened, trying to figure out how we get it. Yeah, and I guess that's men's work too.
Sure.
It's always interesting to me when I think of like all of the mothers that I've come from, and then I think about all the fathers that I have come from. Then I put into perspective that we are the product of all that has been until now. Like we are the next generation of like strong men. We're coming into our 30s, coming into our 40s, and we're taking a look around and we're going, okay, this is all about to be on our shoulders pretty soon. And wondering what the next steps are going to be to be prepared for a role like that, because we haven't been well prepared for that role. I think this is really just a powerful time for us to start seeking union with our masculinity, and also finding that in groups, finding that in community. And I've honestly cherished the time that I've been able to spend with my community of men that have inspired me to look beyond what I may not have been trained or taught or exposed to as I was growing up, but taking the experiences and sharing these stories and sharing perspectives of all the men that have come into my life is at least allowing me to perceive a higher goal for myself. And while it may not have been brought to me like so freely coming up, like at least it's present now. And at least I feel it's present now.
Yeah. Oh, that's
it
beautiful.
takes, everybody comes through a different journey, but I think that we're starting to find each other now, or at least seeking to find each other to help give each other that hope for what our roles may be in this coming future.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. I like that. No, that's beautiful. And I think, again, it's part of the medicine of men being with men and us kind of like practicing fathering each other and being brothers to each other. Because I think, just with like one little note around that topic, it's like we have so much cultural conditioning and so much baggage of different kinds from like, whatever our families were like and where we were raised. And especially in like our 20s and to some degree in our 30s as well, we can think that we have a sense of like what we're here to do or what our purpose is. But if it's not informed by the perspectives of people that we trust, who can see other angles of us that are hidden to us in many ways, then it's probably coming from a fairly selfish, probably somewhat superficial place. Because you're not, it's just kind of coming, you're just like in your own little bubble coming up with this idea, and you're like, oh, this feels interesting. And it's like, yes, that's valuable. And yet I think largely what our purpose is about, or what we're here to do is about, has a lot to do with how we fit into the web of the community, whether that's local or even global for some of us. And that has to be informed by other people, because we're finding out how we meet each other's needs, and we can't figure that out otherwise. Speaking from personal experience, like I've had even though I've practiced meditation and mindfulness, and I think I'm so self-aware, complete blind spots in so many regards, and completely inept in so many regards. And it isn't until I allow people into my space, especially men, because I'm not trying to fuck them, and I'm not, like there's this kind of sense that we're more like brothers and peers. I can trust them to see parts of me. And then when they share something with me, I know they're not trying to get one over on me, or they're not going to use it against me. They actually like share like, hey, do you notice that, you kind of do this or that? And that is so valuable towards my true discovery of like really and truly what I am uniquely qualified to offer in this life.
I vibe with that hard. Yeah. I feel like the most valuable things in my life is people who will tell me who I am.
Yeah.
And most of the time, when people tell you that, it's usually not the good things.
Yeah.
That are, you usually hear a lot of the good things, but it's like people who are willing to talk about the ugly parts of you are just like so valuable.
Oh my, these days, that is the thing, one of the things I value most above all. People giving me feedback around things that I'm doing poorly. And especially when they deliver it in a way where I can tell that they want to see me be better, as opposed to like trying to kind of cut me or like give me like a little jab. There's nothing sweeter than that, because that is, really one of the most potent driving forces of my life is like my getting better and my being more me and my being more confident in like what I'm here to do. And nothing fuels that better than just like a really potent, really accurate piece of advice or, perspective from somebody I trust.
Yeah. I think another part for me is this idea of being seen. And if in order to operate in polite society, for the most part, we are wearing at least some masks. And when someone can see a part of me, even if it's a very dark part of myself, and they recognize that, it's like I'm being seen for at least some truthness of me is being seen. And just the being seen, it feels very good and healthy to me.
Yeah. Can you say more about that? Like, why do you feel that way?
Yeah, I feel like there are few lonelier feelings than thinking that no one actually knows you. Like, you might have lots of friends, but if they don't know the real parts of you, and you've never talked about your pain or your struggles or your downsides, you're not known.
No.
You're not.
It's so true.
Yeah. And I think you could carry this to an extreme. I would make the argument that no one knows each other, including themselves. So, like, I'm friends with you, John, and you, Sage, and I love both of you guys. But I also don't know you, and what I love is I love my conception that I currently have of you guys.
Yeah.
But I feel like as we share space and share intimacy and parts of ourselves, I do feel like I know a closer thing of what you are, and of course you're changing. So if I even caught the perfect image of you guys, it would be dead in a minute.
Yeah.
All different now.
Yeah, right. But I totally resonate with that, and I appreciate the way that you articulated that. Right. There's like kind of like this balance of like recognizing who is willing to kind of lean towards revealing more and more of themselves, and recognizing that, like, yeah, we will never really know all of them. And yet you find those people who you feel safe enough to reveal more and more of yourself, and who seem to like be doing the same in return. And like, even this conversation for me is so joyful, even just to kind of like hear these little bits of your story, and, you know, connecting with you, Sage, as well. It's just one of the sweetest parts of this life experience for me. So thank you for highlighting that.
Yeah, it definitely feels like one of the most potent knowing people.
Yeah.
And I guess people are a mirror. So when you know people, you can also know yourself more. And that's
Sure.
What is more than that?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
It causes me to kind of explore the thought that, you know, once you start getting to know others and sharing their perspective and digesting their, I guess, kind of their air and their vibration, you kind of can start creating a bit of a purpose for yourself in a way, or at least aligning a purpose. If I feel like that maybe at heart we all have a purpose, we just are waiting to discover it.
Yeah.
And perhaps that comes through in the form of connection with others.
Yeah.
Especially in the form of men's work, connecting with other men, to kind of better know ourselves as men.
Yeah. I'm going to take that and run, because another sweet thing about, and this isn't necessarily just like men's work. I mean, now we're kind of broadening the field a little bit, but the idea of mentors and elders. And so, yes, like men's work, I mean, obviously there's like people leading those spaces, but oftentimes it's somewhat like peer groups in a way. Like it's kind of like younger guys. Maybe there's like someone leading it who's older, but to highlight something that felt like it emerged for me in hearing you speak those last few words, especially for those of us, and just to speak personally in this moment, like a man who grew up with no real like masculine role models, not really having much reference point to like even have known any like men well enough to like see an example of a man and be like, that's what I want to be. And then like have maybe like some kind of structure that I can look at and try to emulate, so I can like, oh, let me see how that feels to be in that shape and do that kind of thing. And so I think when we can connect, especially with like elders or mentors or like more mature men who are kind of further down the road, who are doing things, I know for me, even though I've had for now a few years like a pretty clear sense of like the general direction that I'm headed, when I'm in spaces with really powerful men, especially when they embody certain skill sets and flavors of being that are just very foreign to me, I get to like, I'm like, oh, I didn't know a man could move like that. I didn't know a man could do that. And it's like it's inspiring, and it kind of infuses into your field. And then you can like,
you have a structure you can now potentially
structure.
replicate.
Yes. And then even, you know, if it gets to that point and if the opportunity emerges, you can like say, hey, can I work with you? Like there are, depending on what your field is, but you might find people who you find ways of coming into a deeper relationship as like a mentor mentee or like a teacher and student, this kind of thing. So that, again, a super potent element of like culture and community and society that, depending on your field and what access you might have in your local community, sometimes we don't have like a real reference point for that dynamic, which is so potent, you know, because especially these days, I mean, barely any old people want to be labeled as elders. Like people don't even know how to like really embody their like wisdom. And so the ones that do, when you feel them and when you're in their field and their presence, it's like, I think it's so valuable to find those people with whom you resonate and like try to get close to them, try to soak up their being and try to like learn something from them.
In our nuclear American family where people move a lot and break up, like I've never really had grandparents. Like they were alive for part of one, you know, at least one part of each pair was alive for some of my life, but they weren't in proximity to me.
Yeah.
So I definitely, I feel like that is missing so much, where we have these people who have had the experience, have built these skills. I don't think I've ever told someone I wanted them to be my mentor. That's what you saying that made me think maybe I need to. Have you done that?
Not in those words exactly. And just to share a little bit about my process, and again, maybe this is helpful to somebody along, you know, their journey, depending on where they're at. Sometimes what happened to me a couple of times, especially in my early 20s, when I was like just kind of coming out of my first ayahuasca experiences and like really revved up and like really excited and studying shamanism, and in a lot of ways like cultivating a lot in the sense of like my discipline and my practice, but still being super green and very like spiritual materialist and like all these kinds of things, and not having any reference, because I just shot straight to like doing ayahuasca, and then I was just like hanging around like ayahuasca and shamans and stuff. I had not done any work around or had really any reference point for, very limited reference point for like my childhood traumas and the importance and the potency of like our early relationships with our caregivers or the lack thereof. And so I knew that I had a trauma of like my dad not being around, and I accessed some of that through ayahuasca. The point that I'm getting to is that some of the early, like especially when I went to go live in Peru, I would come across some fucking wizards of men that I had never encountered anything like them in the United States where I had grown up. And then realizing I was so fucking in awe of them and I so wanted to like be like them. And I was so wounded. I had such a father wound that in my wanting to satisfy all this fucking stuff, it was like I was projecting father onto them. Like fucking, as opposed to like being like a mature individual, kind of more like in my sort of self-awareness of being like, hey, I see you embody these things. I want to be in your space. Can I take you on as a teacher? Can you teach me things? It was more like unconsciously.
Can you help me heal my wounds and be my father?
Exactly. Unconsciously ending up in situations with them where it was like playing out dynamics that were not productive or effective and troubling for both parties. And so I say all this to say, finding mentors and teachers and role models and elders is like super important. And I highly, highly value the relationships I have with like people who are more mature and knowledgeable. And yet for men and women, you know, wherever you're, you know, just be aware of your relationships with your early caregivers and how that flavors the way you relate to older, more mature figures, because a lot of that stuff will kind of bubble in. And if you're not aware of it, it can get messy. So just wanted to put that out there.
I like that. That's cool. I know for myself, my father, he was a fisherman until I was 10. And so he'd be gone for weeks at a time, or maybe like a month at a time, sometimes depending on the fishery. And then he'd come home, and my dad's dad died when he was 5. And he was raised in a family of women. He's Italian. I don't know where it came from, but he definitely had anger issues. It was like he was not always there, and then he'd show up and maybe be angry sometimes. I really do feel like I took on a personality trait of having to be hypervigilant for other people's feelings and then having to accommodate for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's definitely a part of my current journey of navigating that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I resonate a lot with that. Yeah.
As do I, Julius. I mean, I think kind of to extend off of a thought I had earlier, thinking about the fathers that came before me and how many of them were kind of lost.
Mm-hmm.
And that sense of masculinity was really either injured or not even really imparted on many of those who have come before. And we're kind of the direct product of that now. We're the leftovers of men who weren't really raised with strong core values or strong core even intimacy. I call him my father, but he's technically my stepdad. And, you know, he worked long hours as long as I've known him to be my dad. And for a long time, he was really angry. And it took a long time of him doing the work to really come to terms with why he was angry. So it's interesting is like, as I'm doing my work and feeling like the impressions of those that have come before, in this kind of like mentorless kind of society that we've been living in for a while, and just realizing that the extent of the damage is many generations. I think that it's good that we are starting to come into an awareness that this is work that is important to go ahead and dive right into, to start doing this really hard and honest footwork. But the depths have been sown pretty deep, so there's like a lot to sift through as we explore this work.
100%.
And I like to think of it too as like, this isn't just work that I'm doing for like myself as a man, but like definitely for those that have come before and those that wandered aimlessly, not knowing why.
Yeah. We're trying to create, it'd be nice to create generational wealth, a culture of being that we don't have. Yeah.
And we're at such a crucial, I'm sure every fucking generation that's ever lived has thought this of their own time, but like seriously, it's pretty clear to me, like our generation is like the last one that had the world before cell phones and the internet and all the access to all the information that you could ever desire and all the fucking dopamine little mechanisms of social media and video games and porn and all this stuff. Like we were just at the tail end of that to actually have known the world before that. And now, of course, like we are like we're growing old in the world that's kind of emerging now with virtual reality and everything. Our children are playing on iPads that are far more powerful than anything we ever knew and that our parents ever knew. And what I'm alluding to here is that I think this is how I feel about myself, is I feel like I am living in a very important time as it relates to, again, like being kind of like this last generation, especially as I think about just my own family and like my son and like the descendants that will come. It's like my son will not know the world as I knew it without tech and all this stuff. And so I don't even know, like, without going too far down a rabbit hole, like the world of like regular people being able to go to outer space just for fun and like all this fucking craziness and virtual reality porn that makes you feel like you're fucking there. And I just feel like I have a responsibility to like really anchor in some like good values and like the remembrance of the old ways, remembrance of ceremony, remembrance of like how to actually be in community, remembrance of how to be in our bodies and emotionally intelligent and connected to our hearts and learn how to feel each other and give each other feedback, because the kids that are growing up with the phones and the cell phones and the fake light and all this bullshit food and all the lowering of the testosterone and all the fuckery that's going on. And I'm not a pessimist, I'm an optimist, but I'm saying like there's a lot of shit going on intentionally or otherwise that is not, I think, in the interest of our greatest vitality, health, and creativity as a species. And I think we are kind of like right in this little like turning point where we have a great responsibility and a great power to like share from the space of having still be connected almost to like the world of our ancestors, the world before just the full immersion of technology. And I think that that's potent. I think it's inspiring. And I think it is also like feels a little daunting. Like it's kind of like a responsibility.
Yeah. What you said makes me think it is now, even with technology makes it more necessary to develop internal sense of self and what you want and what you don't want, because technology makes it so easy to get just dopamine or anything. So if you don't really know what is true and what you need, you will end up, it's easy to get a lot of what you don't.
Yeah. And I can't believe like I'm saying these words because this is so far from my interest, but I think I'm noticing more and more, it's like I'm feeling like I have to like speak about this. But in a world where, you know, there are world leaders talking about, you're not going to have to work anymore. You know, you're just you'll be so happy. Like you will figure out, like, I don't know. I don't even know where like the stuff was being talked about, but I guess there's like some kind of world forums where they're talking about like a universal income and like the AI and like the stuff emerging where like, you know, people will just get an income and you'll be happy and you'll be content and like all this stuff. That's the last thing that I want, is like the government kind of like imposing whatever they think that like is best for me and my family. I mean, not to go into like COVID and all this stuff.
Libertarian here.
Okay. And so like, not to go into like any like, you know, politics is like very disinteresting to me. But what I'm getting at is I really appreciate and highly value my own autonomy. And I really think that if we can just empower ourselves to make healthier decisions and kind of like learn to lead ourselves instead of just like asking the government to just like take care of us and like hoping that they'll just be like good mommies and daddies, like I think that there's something healthier about that. And
about being the source of your own solutions.
Yeah And just like kind of like maintaining this footing. Yes, I think the government has its place, and like yes, we should have like firefighters and shit like this, but as it relates to like kind of imposing things regarding our health and what we need to do with our bodies, or like how we should be living, or like these kinds of things, I don't like that at all. That makes me uneasy. And again, as it relates to like the food industry and pesticides and all these kinds of things, you know, I might have like lost my target that I was leading to, but I just wanted to, I guess, express that is valuable to me, as opposed to just like encouraging the government to kind of take more and more control of my life, essentially.
I love that. It's a topic I love to argue inside.
Cool.
Yeah, but I feel like we don't have good support systems, or like community used to give you everything that a government would do, and we don't really have community. So the government, I don't know. Yeah. There's some very big problems that it's nice to have a central government for, just because they're so big. It's hard for individuals to deal with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's definitely a slippery slope.
Yeah.
You know what, Sage? When you had your little outro like 10 minutes ago, I thought that was the end of the.
I mean, I feel pretty good. I feel like we covered a lot of territory. I'm completely open if you guys have questions emerging, or you feel like there's any unfinished business. Like I'm open to like taking things any further if you like. But I feel pretty good. And
there's always unless one of you guys die. Well, that's the nice thing about there being three of us. We can keep this conversation going even if one of us dies.
Sure. Well, soon enough, we'll be able to just like upload clips of whoever died, and then the AI will like learn them, and then they'll like create like a little like face that looks like them, and it'll basically be you.
Yeah.
Just without your soul.
I love that idea actually, like taking all the poetry and stuff I've ever written and putting it into a program.
Yeah.
Like honestly, I think that's cool.
Yeah.
I don't think I have a soul anyway. So.
Okay. Yeah. I'm cool with that.
You know, you did, man. I feel like we have tendrils that lead in other directions, which is why I'd love this to be an and conversation.
Ooh.
So like, this is not the end of the conversation. We have enough things that maybe if we decide we want to delve deeper in them, we can just do this again.
Sure.
Wow. Very well said, Julius.
Thank you, Sage.
I started kind of journeying in my mind towards the coming camp out and just being like excited and prepared for the opportunity to sit down with these conversations again.
Thank you for listening. We hope you will join us for our next episode, where we will be talking to Sean Seed. Sean is a poet, author, and student of soil.
That was great.